Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit. Accept no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss the Tower of Babel moment. We're going to be continuing our reading tonight into a book written by Drs. Joseph P. Farrell and Dr. Scott D. deHart, titled Transhumanism, a Grimoire of Alchemical Agendas. And as you will see, there is an alchemical agenda at play at the very heart of transhumanism and at the very heart of everything going on in the world today. And it all invariably leads to this Tower of Babel moment. Now, I am not the only one to have noticed this through the years, as we shall see in this book. There are others who have come to the same conclusions regarding the transhumanist philosophy and its connections back to the occult and to the ancient mystery schools and the teachings of the philosophies of antiquity. So all of these things interrelate. They're all interconnected. And at the core of all of it are the agendas that are ever present in our world today, and everything going on definitely is a reflection of that. So we're going to look into this concept here because we are living in interesting times. And certainly the occult is front and center, as always. And people are still in denial about it. All you have to do is turn on the Olympic Games, and you'll see occultism in your face, agendas in your face, blatantly thrown about into the public perception and public consciousness in many different ways, and agendas are ever being pushed upon us. Things that don't align with the natural order of things, things that don't align with what is good and right in this world, and we recognize that, and we need to be aware of that. And of course, this is all part of the alchemical theater all around us. It is theater, folks. It is there to influence your mind, to affect your mind in ways you can scarcely recognize on a conscious level, but certainly it is ever present, isn't it? So we're going to go ahead and get right into the reading here tonight. We're going to continue where we left off last time and get right into the portion about the Tower of Babel moment. So leading up to all of this and its attachment to this transhumanist philosophy, we have what Drs. Farrell and deHart describe here as the final alchemo-eschatology. As we pondered all these images, one final thing, the most deeply disturbing thing of them all, became clear. The final political and alchemical transformation of mankind himself seemed to be the hidden goal of so many political movements, and even a hidden implication of the various systems of end-time speculations of various religions. While we do not propose to examine these exhaustively in this book, we do propose to lay the groundwork for a future examination of them, by looking briefly at the hints of the emergence of these political agendas in the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, leaving their hidden influences upon modern religion and politics for a future book. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. And certainly we do see, if you go back and you explore the rich history of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period, you do find that many of our modern ideologies and many of these modern connections we have, not only to transhumanism, but to various other philosophies in this world, can be found there. This was a transformative period in the history of mankind wherein they introduced some new ideas, which were not really new, they were very old ideas, but they were reified in various ways through that period. And we see how all of this spills over into politics, and that's an important thing to realize because it's all political. You see, all this alchemical theater is all political theater as well, and the two of them cross lines at many different junctions and are one and the same. Alchemical theater, political theater. That's why we need to be very cautious when we look at these mainstream news stories that are always circulating. Even the things that are meant to not only be entertainment, but are also intended to be somehow a good unifying thing for the people, are all part of this political theater and alchemical theater. Things like the Olympic Games. It's primarily intended as a means to alchemically transmute the human mind to accept certain new and novel ideas. And we see Olympic years are always big social engineering years, and it's no different this year, is it? Let's go ahead and we will read on here. So Doctors Farrell and deHart say, in conclusion, we would remind the reader of our real purpose. We would have the reader clearly understand that this book does not propose nor advocate the pursuit or practice of any of these alchemical goals, much less practice of a lifestyle or anything of the sort. We are concerned solely and exclusively with the exposition and exploration of the disconcerting images both of God and of man found throughout history and in some very unexpected places, from literature, mythology, and religious iconography to secret societies, and with the influences of that imagery. We are concerned solely with understanding its possible roots and implications for the field of alternative research and for the possible activities of hidden elites through the millennia in a secret fraternal continuity. Consequently, we attempt herein not to justify the perplexing images or metaphors, but rather simply to rationalize them, to reconstruct a possible thought process that led the ancients to formulate them in the first place, and modern science to revivify that pursuit. We are thus also concerned to rationalize the basis for the influence of that image, oftentimes scarcely or little appreciated over the human imagination. And I'm going to pause right there. The importance of the image cannot be stressed enough here. The image of humanity, the image of mankind, and the image of God, and the image of the universe. All of these things implied in the alchemical theater that's always put before the human mind to steer the crowd, to influence the crowd. Now, all of this has been used to great effect for the purpose of social engineering by those dark occultists who run things and their useful idiots that are also known as the quote-unquote elite or the technocrats of this world. They're all one and the same. They're all working towards these same goals. Now, at the very top of the power structure, there are dark occultists who understand some of the philosophical and spiritual underlying things that go along with this, but by and large, much of the management of this is done by technocrats. Those who wish to instantiate a technocracy on the people for the purposes of ultimate control of society. And they often think of themselves as working towards the greater good. So these people think they're doing something good here, and they are largely misled about what it is they're doing and how this will help humankind, the race. You see, it's all about race with these people. Always has been, always will be. This is where the eugenics-based ideas come into play, and transhumanism, you may have heard before described on this program and several others as quote-unquote eugenics without coercion. Because that's how the pro-transhumanists describe it. That's exactly what transhumanism is. It's an extension of eugenics, and these ideas are very, very, very old, and tied back into the old mystery school teachings in alchemical sciences and natural sciences. Such things were even talked about by Plato in his Republic. So we have some very old ideas here, and in the modern era, many of these things came to the forefront in the time period of the mid to late 1800s on forward, and have been promulgated in the guise of a new technocratic form of this apotheosis of mankind, known as the transhumanist movement, or the technocracy movement. It's gone by many names through the course of time. Elon Musk's grandfather was an avowed technocrat. Many people don't know that. If you look up the history of that family, you'll find that they've always been neck deep in all of this stuff. So that being the case, don't make any mistake about it. The guy's not your friend. He's not out there looking out for your best interests. None of these mainstream figures that have any prominence are. They're all part of the big system. They're in the big club, as George Carlin advised us. And we're not. We're not in the big club. So they have agendas in mind. They have goals in mind that don't have your best interests at heart. Let's put it that way. Now let's get back to the reading. So Doctors Farrell and deHart here continue by saying, "That said, we do not mince words in our analysis or our critique, for we believe that it is high time that people confront the implications of these images and their social implications directly, and deal with them with genuine compassion and tolerance, and not with the outworn response of denunciation or persecution founded on standard answers that bear little relation to the deep roots of this tradition. Accordingly, our rationalization of the deep roots of this alchemical imagery and of the possible elites employing or manipulating it is, of course, speculative and highly so. Nonetheless, we do believe that these roots, stemming from a profound metaphor of a deep physics and the application of the analogical method by the ancients to understand it, is at least close to the mental processes that led to the formulation of these images and cosmologies." And I'm going to pause for a moment. And I agree with these two gentlemen who wrote this book. I think it is high time that we do look at this whole ideology, the implications, directly, rather than denunciation or denial or anything of the sort. We need to have an objective analysis of this. Where do all these ideas come from? What is their ultimate end goal? You can know what the intention is, and you can know what the outcomes can be based upon the intentions. And you know some of the tools. We've been studying this stuff for years. If you've been listening to me for any length of time, you know I've put an awful lot of time and effort into reverse engineering many of these things that are being done in this world through the use of this alchemical theater of the masses. So that being the case, we need to take a stark look at this stuff, not be afraid of it, not say that's nonsense and walk away, not to denounce, We need to understand what is the mindset, what are the ideologies of these people who manipulate this alchemical meme in this world. What do they intend to do, and why do they believe the things they do? Where do their belief systems come from? In order to understand how you're supposed to win the spiritual battle, you need to study your enemy and know his tactics, his methodologies, and his ways in which he operates. And you can't do that by subjectively saying, no, that's bad, that's not right, or that's nonsense. Especially when we see so much evidence that something they are doing is working for them. So we need to understand what that is, and it has everything to do with this old alchemical or philosophical way of thinking. It's about the application of these processes in this world that many of these people wield, that we as the public have been engineered not to understand, or to think is silly and nonsensical, and to just completely discredit it and ignore it. And that's a crime and a travesty against us. We need to face this thing head on. We need to acknowledge they are manipulating these images in order to socially engineer the masses in a certain direction. And recognizing that fact is the first step to reversing some of the damage that's been done here and putting us back on a good path for the future. You see, we can do that. We have more power than we realize. We have immense power to change things, and there's a lot of hope for the future, ladies and gentlemen. Although most out there are always talking doom and gloom and bleakness and looking at the state of the world and offering little to no hope, there's tremendous hope. We're in an awakening process in this world. People who in years past would totally turn a blind eye to everything and deny are now beginning to acknowledge, hey, there's a problem. That's the first step. And sometimes we have to introduce it to them slowly. First, we have to point out the political corruption. They all recognize this. That's a good place to start. And once they recognize the political corruption and the depths to which it runs, and just how twisted and manipulated the system is, then maybe their eyes will begin to open towards other things. Especially when these technocrats and these dark occultists who run things in this world are constantly flaunting things in your face. Just look at the Olympic ceremonies. Open Satanism on display there. And of course they'll deny. They'll say, no, it's just an homage to the Greek influence of the Olympic Games. And that may be true to a certain degree, but you can't tell me there's not some other spiritual manifestation underlying that, especially when they admit, the artistic directors admit, that they had done certain things as a mockery to certain people groups. There's just no denying this, and look at the other things going on. The very conventions of what traditionalism has been in this world are being manipulated and twisted askew with this Olympic ceremony, with these Olympic games, with all of these things they're doing and allowing that they haven't allowed before. And of course, people will argue on both sides of the spectrum. You always have those who defend everything that doesn't seem to align with traditional ethics or morality. You always have your liberals out there that are all about tolerance and acceptance of everything except for traditional values, and by and large, Christian values. They don't like that. They're tolerant of everything else. Everything else is okay, but traditional morality and values, that's not okay, because you're an intolerant bigot if you abide by those standards. You see how it is truly one of the most hypocritical things that there is out there. All of those who tout tolerance and acceptance, but yet they speak hate towards people who cling to traditional values which have been ever present with Western culture and mankind from the very beginning, and there's a reason for that, because many of these moral laws and standards are derived from natural law principles. But of course they don't want to hear that. They'll close their ears to that. And they'll push all of this inversion principle upon us, because that's what's at the core of all of it. And as we've discussed here in the past, if you want a true definition of what Satanism is, it's the inversion principle. Certainly, we can see that is a true thing. And it's all over the place. It's all over the place. Let's get back to the reading here, though. Therefore, we do not claim our analysis is complete, only that it is highlighting obvious, though overlooked things, largely because people do not wish to face them. We do not assume that we will convince anyone, because we are not seeking to convince, but to only explore and rationalize a complex and curious phenomenon, a veritable galaxy of constellations of concepts, images, and traditions that are all closely associated. We do not presume to write as theologians or clergymen on behalf of any church or religion. We are authors challenging models of history and thought, whether religious or secular, in order to provoke deeper thought related to modern research. We do not call people to any faith, but to those of faith or without faith. This book is intended to provoke thought, not a following or belief. But we do hope that we will, on the end of this work, have at least made some people stop and think. And I'm going to pause there before we continue to the next section, which is at the heart of this broadcast today. Just to point out, all of this is intended to make people think. This is something that's largely missing in our modern culture and society today. Deep philosophical thought. We don't do that. We don't take the time to think deeply or richly about things. Of course, if you're listening to this broadcast, you are the exception to that. This is what we do. We like to think deeply on these things, to ponder upon the origins and the effects of these various things that are interconnected in many ways throughout this world that mankind scarcely understands. There is an alchemical meme that undergirds everything in this reality. We are accepting that. We accept that there is this concept at the heart of all of it. There's this constellation of concepts, according to Drs. deHart and Farrell here. And they're correct. It is a constellation of concepts. There's a lot of different things that tie together within this alchemical meme that undergirds everything. It undergirds philosophy, religion, secular life, science, all of the above. It's ever present. It's always there. It's part of human experience. It's part of natural world experience. It's a part of this place, whether you acknowledge it or not. And by and large, a lot of the problem in modern society is it is not acknowledged, because it's not something that could be comfortably measured or quantified by our modern science. But yet, it's ever present, and this phenomenon is demonstrable in many ways. When you look, this alchemical meme or this alchemical theater underlies everything in this world. And it's at the heart of the push for this modernized version of the old apotheosis, this transhumanist notion. That's certainly the direction that the social controllers are trying to steer us towards. And I think it's a false paradigm, folks. We've been warned about this. It's the great lie from the Garden of Eden. Man cannot be God. Man can never become God. Yes, we are created in God's image, and therefore we are little creators of sorts, but we can never be God. Plain and simple. And we've been told this, although these people hold out hope that they can become this, and they've twisted and contorted many of the old teachings and applied them in directions that benefit a select few and not the whole of humanity. And they think they can achieve this goal, this ancient goal of apotheosis, through the use and the advent of high technologies. And they're misguided. They are misguided in this belief. It always ends catastrophically when it is pursued in that way, and we have examples of this, and that is right where we're going right now. The Tower of Babel moment of history. The primordial unity and high knowledge of man and how it was dealt with. And this portion of the book opens with some quotes from some very important and noteworthy people, the first of which is Joseph Campbell, who says, quote, "If God is a tribal, racial, national, or sectarian archetype, we are the warriors of his cause. But if he is a lord of the universe itself, we then go forth as knowers to whom all men are brothers," end quote. And then a quote by Leonard Bernstein. You may have heard of this guy as well. Quote, "Obviously, the ultimate evidence of universality in speech is to be sought in the oldest languages of man, prehistoric languages which preceded, so to speak, the Tower of Babel moment in human evolution," end quote. Some important concepts already noteworthy in those quotes. Let's get back to it. Virtually every religion and most esoteric metaphysical systems have had something to say about one of the most curious topics in religion, the Tower of Babel moment of history, or to put it in more familiar and conventional terms, the fall of man. It is a curious, perhaps even bizarre, image when one really stops to think about it because of the constellation of concepts that usually accompany it. And this is true no matter where one looks. Due to our cultural matrix, we in the West tend to view the fall of man and the Tower of Babel moment as separated events, for that is the way they are presented in the Bible. Going to pause for a moment here. Now, this is where Doctors Farrell and deHart veer a little from mainstream conceptions of things, and nothing wrong with this. I don't know myself if these are the same events, if it's the same event recorded in two different ways in two different places in the Bible, as they conjecture here. But certainly we could understand the archetype present. It is the very same archetype, and that's the important thing to keep in mind. The archetype is clear. So let's read on. So this is what they believe. They say, "But we believe that they are, in fact, connected fragments of a single story, perhaps separated out of some editorial agenda. What is also equally curious is that virtually all these concepts refer to a point in history where mankind was engaged in a project or where his knowledge and or unity posed some sort of implicit threat to God or the gods. We will look at various versions of this Tower of Babel, fall of man moment of history, as they are recorded in disparate and discrete traditions, for in doing so, a very interesting catalog of concepts emerges." And I'm going to pause for a moment. So like I said, this constellation of concepts, as they refer to it here, is the important undergirding thing related to all of this. This is the alchemical meme that underlies everything. It's the archetype. We have this archetype that's ever present, and we need to pay close attention to this archetype. It appears in multiple stories throughout the course of human history in various religions and mythological concepts and everywhere else. It's a theme. You begin to see a pattern emerge. This is one of the most important precepts of looking at all of this stuff, is becoming aware of the patterns and beginning to recognize the patterns. This is at the heart of being able to name an archetype that undergirds all of these things. It's through pattern recognition. And we can only do this through deep research into our history and our religious and philosophical belief systems and where they come from and the origins thereof. Find the oldest things, the oldest sources you can with a lot of this stuff. Find the commonalities, recognize the pattern, and when you see the pattern, you can begin to break down the pattern into constituent parts and therefore be able to put a name to the particular archetype. And this is extremely helpful for being able to recognize social engineering agendas being promulgated. If you recognize the archetypes being leveraged in certain ways, you can understand what the intention is and what the variable outcomes can be. And this is massively important in the study of symbology or symbolism. You need to know the intention and the context in order to understand what the outcome will be. So if you know one of the two, if you know the context in which the symbol is being used, or the intention behind the symbol being used, you can know a little something about the archetype being leveraged. But unless you know both of them, you don't know what the outcome will be. Now, if you do know both of them, then you can understand what the outcome is supposed to be, and you can apply different ways of thinking against that if it is not a suitable outcome for you. This is part of the power that we have, that the powers that should not be do not want us to recognize in this world. Their house of cards crumbles when we remove our consent from their systems. This is a way in which you could remove your consent, by learning to decipher the symbols that they use, by knowing the intention and the context. Both of these, you can know what their intended outcome is, and then you can counter that by removing your consent from that. And it's as simple as that. You see, this revolution that's coming doesn't have to be a violent revolution. There doesn't have to be a civil war or anything of the sorts. That's exactly what they want. They want violence, warfare, and bloodshed and dissension. It doesn't have to be that. It's as simple as telling them no. That's it. Remove your consent from their systems. Tell them no. Do not comply with their ridiculous demands, and their house of cards crumbles. And if enough people do that, peaceful non-compliance, they're helpless to do anything about that. You see, then things become unenforceable. If everybody stands up en masse and says, nope, we're not doing that. We'll use the example of the pandemic situation as an example. If everybody had said, no, I'm not shutting down my business for 2 weeks and locking myself in my house or putting on a mask or going out and getting an injection or anything else. No, I'm not doing that. If enough people said no, then our economy wouldn't be in the tank. Then our society wouldn't be in the shape that it's in today. People would have continued going about their business like usual. We wouldn't have had all of these bad outcomes that have come. We would have had different outcomes than that. And it's as simple as saying no. Even though they threatened the force of law and everything else, if enough people stood up and said no, and especially those in the enforcement end, if they said no, that's not constitutional, I'm not going to enforce that, then guess what? It becomes unenforceable, and then there's no power behind the quote-unquote mandate or whatever kind of legalistic structure they wanted to try to implement to put that in place. It's a violation of the free will concept, which is an important fundamental to natural law. So if you remove your consent from that and you don't consent, then it has no power over you, and then their whole system crumbles before them under its own weight, usually in catastrophic ways. But that's the key. Mass noncompliance, peaceful noncompliance, is how we put a stop to these agendas we don't like. Plain and simple. Like I said, doesn't have to be an insurrection or any kind of violence or civil war or any type of strife like that they want. See, that's exactly what these controllers of this world, these technocrats, want. Because then it gives them justification to lay the hammer down. and use their technologies to implement these draconian controls over everybody, to almost force people into mass compliance in violation of the free will principle. And they have a convoluted sense of what your consent is. And this is the other facet of it we need to confront as well. But all of this aligns very heavily with this archetype at play here, the Tower of Babel moment, because we are approaching a Tower of Babel moment here in our society in the very near future here today. It's all going to catastrophically collapse under its own weight because of the impositions that these technocrats and these dark occultists who run things in the world, those 1%ers of this world, have imposed upon the rest of us. It's going to collapse upon itself catastrophically in the very near future. You see, it's a pipe dream for these social engineers. They want to become gods of this place in no uncertain terms. They think they can do it in their hubris, and they're about to get some comeuppance in this world. And it may be ugly for a time, but it's only because of the things they've done. They have themselves to blame for it. But let's get into the biblical version of the Tower of Babel moment, the Tower of Babel story itself. Well, we have written about this topic elsewhere. It is best to review those scattered comments from the perspective of what we are calling the Tower of Babel moment, for when viewed synoptically, these various traditions reveal an intriguing list of related concepts, and in doing so, reveal a hidden alchemical agenda consisting of precise steps to re-cement a primordial human unity, a unity lost in the fragmentation of the Tower of Babel moment. Thus, while this section will be to some extent a review of what we have previously written, the review is necessary to establish the catalog of related concepts, and thereby this hidden alchemical eschatology that these concepts imply. The Old Testament version of the Tower of Babel moment is recorded in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, and we'll go ahead and read that. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, God too, let us build a city, and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. And that's the end of the quote from the Bible. What is unusual about this story is that it lacks the type of moral sanctions usually given in the Old Testament for Yahweh's, symbolized by the translation Lord in the Authorized Version's, actions. Such sanctions are missing here. Rather, what one is left with is that somehow, whatever it is that mankind is doing, it requires action to fragment his unity and stop the project. A glance at the concepts implied in the story will be helpful in highlighting this dynamic. First of all, number 1 point. Mankind is viewed in a state of unity, which is exemplified by a common speech, and this unity is fragmented by the action of Yahweh by creating a multiplicity of language. Number 2, the unified speech of mankind might also imply a unified language of science, i.e., a highly unified scientific worldview wherein the major sciences, physics, biology, genetics, and so on, are all viewed and understood with a completeness and unity our current science lacks. Number 3, the idea of language also subtly implies the idea of sound, and this might be connected to the tower. Confounding the languages thus breaks not only mankind's unity, but perhaps also breaks or impedes the power of the tower. Number 4, the story implies that a unified mankind is a threat in some sense, and that this threat is tied to the tower itself. And number 5, thus, the fragmentation of man via confounding of his language removes both the threat and its power. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So this is how Doctors Farrell and deHart view this, and they point out these various aspects of the story. And of course, we do see many of these things present in the story, and we understand there is some type of an underlying archetype, this archetype of unity that undergirds all of it, and that somehow this unity of action of man is a threat somehow to the powers that be. So the second portion of this is talking about the fall of man, and this relates to the Tower of Babel story as well. So it says, while the Tower of Babel story is separated in the Old Testament from the story of the fall of man, nonetheless the same broad list of conceptual relations obtains between the two, and this suggests that they are meant to be at least conceived as related stories, if not perhaps two different tellings of the same event, for the points enumerated above are also subtly in play in the biblical story of the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3, where again there is a coupling of knowledge and the loss of the unity of mankind, this time through the imposition of death or the fragmentation of soul and body. And as we shall encounter much later, some rabbinical and patristic commentators even argue that the division of the sexes from a primordial masculine androgyny was also connected to the fall. And I'm going to pause again for a moment there, pointing out this masculine androgyny connection. Once again, this is also an important precept that needs to be understood here. If you listen to part 1 of this presentation, you know that this is one of the concepts that undergirds a lot of what's going on as far as this alchemical theater of the masses goes today. This is why we have this push for transgenderism and all of these things, eliminating gender archetypes from play. It has to do with what is called this primordial masculine androgyny here, which undergirds much of the alchemical meme in relation to the context of things today. So we'll get into this next portion that talks about the Mesopotamian version of the Tower of Babel, the Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. The Mesopotamian version of the Tower of Babel moment of history is given in the epic Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. Here, the story emerges as a contest between two cities, Uruk and Arata, with Enmerkar, priest-king of Uruk, demanding from the city of Arata workers, gold, and, as we shall see, an unusual kind of silver to complete a tower. Throughout the story, however, the androgynous goddess Inanna hovers in the background, along with the ever-present and mischievous Enki, who was the god that helped engineer mankind into existence in our Mesopotamian texts. For example, at the beginning of the epic, we read that Inanna carried the great mountain in Uruk in her heart, determining to coerce Arata to supply the workers and materials needed. Enki and Inanna issue a veiled threat. And of course, here's the threat here. It says, may Enki not have to curse Arata and the settlements. May he not have to destroy it too, like places he had at other times destroyed. Inanna has set out after it, has screamed at it, has roared at it. May she not have to drown it too with a flood wave, like the flood waves with which she drowns. And that's the end of the quote there. So shortly after this scarcely veiled threat is issued to Arata, we find the first reference in the text to an implied unity of mankind, and it says as follows. In those days, there being no snakes, there being no scorpions, there being no hyenas, there being no lions, there being no dogs or wolves, there being nothing fearful or hair-raising, mankind had no opponents in those days in the countries Subartu Hamazi, bilingual Sumer, being the great country of princely office, the region of Uri, being a country in which was what was appropriate, the country Marduk, lying in safe pastures in the whole compass of heaven and earth, the people entrusted to him could address Enlil, verily, in but a single tongue. Gonna pause for a moment. So here's the Mesopotamian account of mankind having one unified language at one time in history. Let's read on and see what else it says. So here, as in the biblical version, mankind's unity appears to be couched in linguistic terms, though how Sumer could be both bilingual and yet speak to Enlil in but a single tongue is not made clear. As in the biblical text, it is this socio-linguistic unity of mankind that is broken. The one who breaks it in this Mesopotamian account, though, is Enki. And it says here, in those days, having lordly bouts, princely bouts, and royal bouts, did Enki, having lordly bouts, princely bouts, and royal bouts, having lordly bouts fought, having princely bouts fought, and having royal bouts fought, did Enki, lord of abundance, lord of effective comment, did the lord of intelligence, the country's clever one, did the leader of the gods, did the sagacious omen revealed lord of Erudu, estrange the tongues in their mouths, as many were put there, the tongues of men which were one. And that's the end of the quote there. So we have Enki in this version, confounding the languages. So we have Yahweh in the biblical version, confounding the language. We have Enki in the Mesopotamian version, confounding the language. So we have this common theme underlying here, and it relates to language. And what do we know about language? To give it a little bit more context, language, the spoken word, this is an important concept. You see, this is the instrument of spirit, as we are advised in Falconelli's Mystery of the Cathedrals. Language, the spoken word, the instrument of spirit. So if you have unified spirit, this is a very powerful thing. Now, if you have fragmented spirit, you have the breaking of this language, this instrument of spirit. Well, this leads to further means of control for those social engineers who utilize this concept. If you could keep people confused and unable to communicate effectively, this is one way in which to quell spiritual concerns. This is what's been done, because like we've been advised, language is the instrument of spirit. This is something that makes mankind unique among all the animals here on earth. We have this tool of language. We have this instrument of language, this instrument of spirit that we can use in various ways to get things done. That's a very key distinction here. So understanding that, we could continue on. It says, unlike the biblical version, no reason is really given as to why the gods, or Enki acting alone, took the decision to fragment mankind's unity by scrambling his single language into several. However, a hint of the reason might lie in the suggestions of conflict recorded at the beginning of the passage. If this be so, then mankind apparently again may have posed some sort of threat to the gods in his unified state. Before departing this story, there is a curious passage that must be mentioned, for it contains the only hint of a technology in the story. First, the threat is repeated by Enmerkar's envoy to Arada, and then a demand for certain materials is made, and it says here in the text, "May I not have to made his city fly off from him, like wild doves from their tree? May I not have to make it fly like birds out of their nests? May I not have to appraise it at current market rate for slaves? May I not have to scoop up dust in it, as in a destroyed city? May Enki not have to curse Arada and the settlements? May he not have to destroy it too, like places he has at other times destroyed? Inanna has set out after it, has screamed at it, has roared at it. May she not have to drown it too with a flood wave with which she drowns, rather, when it has packed gold in its native form into leather pouches, has aligned with it purified silver in dust form. And that's the end of the passage there. So it says, those familiar with the lore of alchemy will recognize this reference to powdered metals, in this case silver in dust form, the final stage, in the confection of the Philosopher's Stone. Additionally, metals in powdered form are a hallmark of the so-called ormus, or orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, first discovered by Arizona farmer David Hudson. The nuclei of such metals apparently exist in a high-spin state, possess peculiar anti-gravity properties, and can only be confected by extremely high heat. The appearance of purified silver in dust form thus strongly suggests a high technology in play, and an alchemical one at that. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. Is there a deeper physics being implied in these stories? Maybe. Of course, we know much of the history of these alchemical premises in developing what they call the Philosopher's Stone, and we do see some of these strange anomalies here, like the orbitally rearranged monatomic elements, also known as ormes. Ormus. Have you heard of ormus? You see the relationship here between some new terminology and some old terminology. Of course, metallurgy, in the alchemical sense, this can be implied as an analogy in some of the alchemical sciences, but there are those who claim to be able to actually do these things, have performed these processes, wherein they can make the Philosopher's Stone, and in so doing, they can achieve certain outcomes with this Philosopher's Stone. And some of these may relate to some physics concepts, some alternative physics concepts that aren't accepted by our mainstream science today. And I think that's what's being alluded to here by Doctors Farrell and deHart. Now, are they correct in this assumption? I don't know. I do find it to be intriguing, though. We do have these properties that are reported with these types of things. He's talking peculiar anti-gravity type properties. Well, exotic propulsion systems and things like that are reported within the auspices of the special access programs of the military-industrial complex. There's those who claim that at places like Lockheed Skunk Works, they're able to develop anti-gravity spacecraft and things of that nature. Is there truth to this? Maybe. If there is, I suspect that there's something more akin to alchemical processes being applied in the development of these technologies than modern scientific ones. But that's conjecture on my part. And perhaps this is important, because I think all of these unified ideas underlie everything. It's this whole alchemical meme, which undergirds our reality. It undergirds the very sciences of physics, metaphysics being the other side of that coin as well, and everything else that goes along with this way of thinking. You see, it's all aligned together, although it seems disparate and separate. So when you're thinking in terms of philosophy, you're thinking in terms of history, of religion, of these old stories we have. If you can apply scientific ways of thinking to it, you come across this constellation of ideas, or constellation of concepts, as described here by these two gentlemen in this book. And they're all related. That's the important thing. That's why they call them a constellation of concepts. They're all interrelated when you learn to think outside the box and see how the dots connect when they do. And it all has to do with this alchemical meme that undergirds all of it. That's the unifying portion thereof. And this unity was broken in this Tower of Babel moment. So now we think of all these things as separate compartmentalized elements, and they're all of the same thing. I hope I'm making sense to you out there. Hope I'm not losing you, because this is something that requires you to step outside the bounds of what our normal education system teaches us and be able to look at this as all one grand unifying principle behind everything that we see. And when you understand that, then you begin to see how certain unrelated things, certainly seeming unrelated things, can be influenced in other ways that don't seem to relate, but they certainly do. That's the power of alchemy, folks. And it's being wielded by a select few people at the topmost levels of this power structure in this world in ways that it leverages principles against the masses, but for their own nefarious, greedy agendas. When you come to that understanding, then you can see why it is that they perform these mass ritual ceremonies, why they do the things they do, because it's a type of energy vampirism, really. They're influencing your unconscious mind in ways to contribute energies to a thing that you really shouldn't be contributing energy to it. They use us to bring about the changes in this world that they want. And we can put a stop to that by removing our consent from their systems. And it's as simple as that. But if you don't recognize it's happening, then you can't remove your consent from it. If you don't know what's going on. Now, of course, they do everything in their power to tell you. That's why they give us predictive programming, revelation of the method. That's why in the entertainment media, they'll tell you what they have in mind. They'll tell you. And your lack of objecting to that, they take that as your tacit consent, and therefore, they will engineer it in the reality at some point. And that's what we see. But if you don't recognize it's really going on, then you have no power over it. They've usurped your power. Do you see how this works? They've usurped your sovereignty. That's why it's important that we point out these things that are going on. And like I said, I hope I'm making sense to you folks out there. Sometimes many of these concepts and ideas are very hard to convey in the limited language that we have now. That's been engineered away from us. Because if we had this unity against this power structure, well, their monopoly on things would not last very long. If we had this unified objective to build a better future rather than be fragmented as we are, if we had the same one accord mindset, we would be able to achieve a whole lot more. But we have this small technocratic elite who are pitted against the rest of us and have caused division and strife among us. And it could be argued that perhaps they were the engineers of this fragmenting of language. The small, lowercase g gods in the stories, which would relate to the fallen angelic beings in the book of Genesis, the Nephilim. These types of people, maybe they are the ones that somehow engineered the fragmenting of this language and tried to pin it on God Almighty, or maybe it was God Almighty who fragmented the language because being led by these fallen angelic beings, perhaps this was going to bring about some greater destruction to humanity whom he loved. And he had to fragment the language because of that. I don't have the answers, folks. All I know is you could look at the archetype present here and understand that it's the fragmenting of this unity of spiritual attribute here that has caused a lot of the division in this world. And you could also argue that perhaps it's the result of natural law. That if you act in unity towards the inversion of natural law, at some point nature self-corrects, and it'll bring about this Tower of Babel moment that causes the division once again. But as we are advised, language is the instrument of spirit. So that being the case, if we're not on the same page with the language, we're not on the same page in our spirit. And this is wherein a lot of these concepts fall back to the archetypal level. But let's get back to the reading. I hope I didn't confuse or lose any of you there on that whole diatribe, because I think it's important to understand that language itself has been weaponized against us, simply because it is the instrument of spirit. Let's read on. The Enmerkar and the Lord of Arada epic thus only hints at certain themes made more clear in the biblical version, the first of which is mankind existed in a primordial unity that was linguistic and therefore presumably social in nature. Number 2, mankind's unity was fragmented by Enki through the confounding of languages after the barest of hints of conflict. Number 3, further threats are issued against Arada in the name of androgynous goddess Inanna and the god Enki. Number 4, a slight through clear suggestion of an alchemical technology is made in the demands of Arada to deliver a purified silver in dust form. So I'm going to pause for a moment before we continue. So we have these common elements here. So we have this allusion to a technology of sorts, an alchemical technology, having to do with the purified silver in dust form. So these are some interesting connections, and I don't know if there's a there or not with this. But certainly you could sense the alchemical meme underlying it, the theme, the archetype. So next we're going to look at the Mayan story related to the Tower of Babel moment, the Mayan Popol Vuh, the original differentiation. Turning from the Mesopotamian to the Mesoamerican, the Mayan Popol Vuh records yet another and one of the most intriguing versions of the Tower of Babel moment. But before we can examine that more closely, we must situate it in its context of its account of the primary differentiation itself. So then Dr. Farrell and Dr. deHart go on to say that in their previous book, The Grid of the Gods, they noted that this primary differentiation in Mayan legend takes a specific form, and it's worth recalling in detail what was said there, so they tell you right here what they said in the previous book about it. And it says, like the Hindu cosmology laid out in stone reliefs at Angkor Wat, the Popol Vuh begins in an abyss of mystery, an abyss laid out in eloquent and elegantly simple words and imagery, whose power is made even more manifest by their poetic simplicity. This is the account. Here it is. Now it still ripples, now it still murmurs, ripples, it still sighs, still hums, and it is empty under the sky. Here follow the first words, the first eloquence. There is not yet one person, one animal, bird, fish, crab, tree, rock, hollow, canyon, meadow, forest. Only the sky alone is there. The face of the earth is not clear. Only the sea along is pooled under all the sky. There is nothing whatever gathered together. It is at rest. Not a single thing stirs. It is held back, kept at rest under the sky. Whatever there is that might be is simply not there, only murmurs, ripples, in the dark, in the night. Only the maker, modeler alone, sovereign plumed serpent, the bearers, begetters, are in the water, a glittering light. They are there. They are enclosed in Quetzal feathers in blue-green. Thus the name plumed serpent. They are great knowers, great thinkers in their very being. And of course there is the sky, and there is also the heart of sky. This is the name of the god as it is spoken. And then came his word. He came here to the sovereign plumed serpent. Here in the blackness, in the early dawn, Thunderbolt Hurricane comes first, the second is Newborn Thunderbolt, and the third is Sudden Thunderbolt. So there were 3 of them, and I'm going to pause for a moment there. You'll notice the inherent trinity here. And this is according to the Mayan tradition, and if you've listened to this program, you know that the claim is within the secret schools that the Mayans were the remnants of the Atlantean civilization. So this tends to give you a little more context into ways of thinking here and where perhaps some of these ideas come from. But let's continue on. So Dr. Farrell and Dr. deHart continue by saying, note that the topological metaphor of a primordial trinity is preserved. Everything begins as an emptiness under the sky, and there is not yet any differentiation within it. There is not yet one person, one animal, and so on. There is only an empty sky, and pooled water at rest beneath it. The only thing existing is sovereign plumed serpent, and a mysterious reference to bearers and begetters in the water, who are described as great knowers, great thinkers in their very being, who are later found, just like Vishnu, to be manifestations of sovereign plumed serpent. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So perhaps this can all be construed as an allusion to the existence of this Atlantean civilization, and these being the fragment or remains of that civilization deriving from the Mayan cosmology. Maybe this is what's being referred to here. We see the sovereign plumed serpent is a symbol that was inherent there and has spread from there to other parts of the world. But let's see what Drs. deHart and Farrell say here. The Popol Vuh is telling us, in other words, that there is a primordial nothing, sovereign plumed serpent, and then there is a primordial trinity of endless, indistinct sky, and below it a sea, and the implied common surface between the two. Nothing else whatsoever at this juncture exists except a faint murmuring and rippling in the night, implying somehow that sound, frequency, vibration give rise to all the fecund distinctions and variety to follow. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Is this all starting to sound very familiar? If you've been listening to this broadcast for any length of time, you know all of this sounds very familiar to the many teachings of the mystery schools. Everything is frequency, vibration, sound emanated from that. The spoken word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Perhaps we're seeing some type of alchemical truth underlying some of this. Truth about manifestation in its various iterations here. Truth behind cosmology. Of course, I don't know what all this entails or what the implication really is, but you can see the common themes, can't you? You understand the archetype is present, and it's important, and there is some type of a subtle truth behind it. And what the nature of it is open for debate. But let's continue on. So it says, indeed, at the very beginning, the Popol Vuh informs us that this is the beginning of the ancient word. Here, in this place called Quiche. Here we shall inscribe, we shall implant the ancient word, the potential and source for everything done, in the nation of the Quiche people. So, going to pause before we continue on. So now we have this Mayan culture story talking about the same thing, and we can see the word, the spoken word, sound, vibration, all of these archetypes ever present, and it's all about this manifestation in reality here. And we don't know what to make of this. This is one of the common alchemical themes that undergirds everything, all the different creation stories of mankind. So there's a universal truth underlying much of this that we could hardly conceive of. But it's important that we try to conceive of it, because all of this is underscored by the concept of language. A unified spirit of sorts. So next, Doctors deHart and Farrell go on to talk about the primordial masculine androgyny of man, mankind's original high knowledge, and the fall as fragmentation. So now's where they're going to begin to connect some dots here. It is within this context that the Popol Vuh sets the creation and subsequent fragmentation of mankind. And it says here, and these are the names of our first mother fathers. They were simply made and modeled, it is said. They had no mother and no father. We have named the men by themselves. No woman gave birth to them, nor were they begotten by the builder, sculptor, bearer, begetter. By sacrifice alone, by genius alone they were made. They were modeled by the maker, modeler, bearer, begetter, sovereign plumed serpent. And when they came to fruition, they came out human. They talked and they made words. They looked and they listened. They walked. They worked. They were good people, handsome, with looks of the male kind. Thoughts came into existence and they gazed. Their vision came all at once. Perfectly they saw, perfectly they knew everything under the sky whenever they looked. The moment they turned around and looked around in the sky, on the earth, everything was seen without any obstruction. They didn't have to walk around before they could see what was under the sky. They just stayed where they were. As they looked, their knowledge became intense. Their sight passed through trees, through rocks, through lakes, through seas, through mountains, through plains. And when they were asked by the builder and mason, "What do you know about your being? Don't you look? Don't you listen? Isn't your speech good, and your walk? So you must look to see out under the sky. Don't you see the mountain plain clearly? So try it," they were told. And then they saw everything under the sky perfectly. After that, they thanked the maker, modeler. Truly now, double thanks, triple thanks that we've been formed. We've been given our mouths, our faces. We speak, we listen, we wonder, we move. Our knowledge is good. We've understood what is far and near. And we've seen what is great and small under the sky, on the earth. Thanks to you, we've been formed. We've come to be made and modeled, our grandmother, our grandfather. They said when they gave thanks for having been made and modeled. They understood everything perfectly. They sighted the four sides, the four corners in the sky, on the earth, and this didn't sound good to the builder and sculptor. What our works and designs have said is no good. We have understood everything, great and small, they say. And so the bearer, begetter, took back their knowledge. What should we do with them now? Their vision should at least reach nearby. They should see at least a small part of the face of the earth, but what they're saying isn't good. Aren't they merely works and designs in their very names? Yet they'll become as great as gods unless they procreate, proliferate at the sowing, the dawning, unless they increase. Let it be this way now. We'll take them apart just a little. That's what we need. What we've found out isn't good. Their deeds would become equal to ours just because their knowledge reaches so far. And such was the loss of the means of understanding along with the means of knowing everything by the four humans. The root was implanted, and then their wives and women came into being. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. So essentially what's being conveyed in this aligns very much so with what we've read in the past by the secret schools pertaining to the Atlantean civilization and the Lemurian civilization. You see, they claim that at one time man existed in this very much two-sexed type of existence wherein he was able to bud new humanity from himself. There was no male and female. It was this masculine androgyny that's referred to here by Doctors Farrell and deHart. That man existed in this state, and that somehow this offshoot of the advent of gender differentiation of the masculine and feminine led to the fall of man, led to this division of the unity of spirit and the confusion of languages. That's what's being implied here. Now you can see how Doctors deHart and Farrell have equated this idea to the Tower of Babel moment. You could see how the fall of man, Tower of Babel, Perhaps it's the same archetype present. And perhaps there are older stories that we can look at that try to explain this. And certainly, if you've listened long enough and you've heard the breakdowns being done on what is known by the secret schools about the Atlantean epoch and the Lemurian epoch, you know that this is a large portion of what they teach in the secret doctrine. That mankind has changed, that these gender differentiations came about, this separating of the masculine and feminine. And you could understand that perhaps this is wherein some of the language confusion came about. It's the same archetype at play. That being the case, with that same archetype at play here, we can recognize some of the commonality of the alchemical meme underlying some of this. So we have these themes, so let's get back to this and see what the breakdown Dr. Farrell and Dr. deHart have on this. Once again, we note the themes of the unity and knowledge of mankind are linked, and that in that condition, mankind poses some sort of threat to the gods. As a result, we find again the themes of the loss of knowledge and the fragmentation of mankind are linked in a kind of fall. But there are a number of crucial details here. Number one, the unity of mankind is conceived to be in masculine androgynous terms, i.e., as an original male-female sexual unity, and this unity is tied somehow to the perfect knowledge that mankind has, a point which is stressed over and over again in this passage. Number two, this unity in knowledge in turn constitutes some sort of threat to the gods. Number three, the gods take the decision to curb mankind's original unity in the now familiar pattern by fragmenting mankind. Only in this case, the fragmentation is predictably the division of the original androgyny into the sexes. Once this is accomplished, mankind loses his knowledge. The implication is that mankind's original androgyny might have been tied either to immortality or longevity, and the division of the sexes results in the loss of that longevity or immortality, and consequently in a loss of knowledge. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. This is also when it is claimed by the secret schools that man lost his spiritual sight. That before, in the Lemurian epic, he was able to see into the spiritual realms, and he lost that spiritual sight, later developing through the Atlantean epoch, through the evolution of mankind during that time, in which the third eye began to sink deeper into the head and become aligned with what is now known as the pineal gland, the third eye, the source of spiritual sight. And now it is said that we have lost this spiritual sight and we've been more crystallized into the physical in this evolutionary epoch of mankind. This is where these claims come from. This is all taught in their secret doctrine, and we've covered some of this stuff at length before. So you can see how much of what's being presented here by these two scholars, Dr. Farrell and Dr. deHart here, aligns with much of what's been taught in the secret schools. Now, does it mean that this is absolutely 100% true? Most certainly not. But it does seem to show there is this common alchemical meme that undergirds everything, and perhaps a lot of these same ideologies come from some source of truth in the ancient past that we can scarcely understand today. So it's important we consider these things and we understand what it is that these technocrats and elitists and dark occultists who run things in this world believe about themselves and about mankind and about our evolution. And that's the key to all of it. You see, they view transhumanism as the next step in human evolution, self-guided evolution, and they want to go there. So whether you accept evolution or not is irrelevant. What you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these precepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us, and certainly we see that today. This is where the advent of false sciences like Darwinian evolution and eugenics all derive from. It comes from these ancient teachings about racial purity, about racial evolution, the race of mankind, how certain races are more spiritually evolved than others. This is what they teach through their secret doctrine, and this is the heart of where all racism comes from. And it all aligns with these teachings presented in this alchemical meme here. And it has to do with this Tower of Babel moment, or the fall of mankind. Let's read on, and we're going to close it up. It is also to be noted that mankind is created by some act or action conceived to be a sacrifice. All these themes find their earliest expression once again in Ocean and Half a World Away, in Plato's Symposium, and in the ancient culture of the Vedas. So we're going to go through the Platonic version here. The Platonic version of this primordial androgyny and fall is more difficult to piece together simply because the whole doctrine is scattered throughout the various dialogues of Plato. For our purposes, we shall concentrate on only one of his dialogues here, the Symposium or Banquet, placing its contents within the wider Platonic system. Oddly, however, Plato suggests almost exactly the same thing that is stated in the Mayan Popol Vuh. Namely, the division of the sexes had to be accomplished, so far as the gods were concerned, in order to render mankind more feeble. Quote, "You ought first to know the nature of man, and the adventures he has gone through, for his nature was anciently far different from that which it is at present. First, then, human beings were formerly not divided into two sexes, male and female. There was also a third, common to both the others, the name of which remains, though the sex itself has disappeared. The androgynous sex, both in appearance and in name, was common both to male and female. Its name alone remains, which labors under a reproach. At the period to which I refer, the form of every human being was round, the back and the sides being circularly joined, and each had 4 arms and as many legs, 2 faces fixed upon a round neck, exactly like each other, 1 head between the 2 faces, 4 ears, and 2 organs of generation, and everything else, as from such proportions it is easy to conjecture. Man walked upright as now, in whatever direction he pleased, and when he wished to go fast, he made use of all his 8 limbs, and proceeded in a rapid motion by rolling circularly round like tumblers, who, with their legs in the air, rumble round and round. We account for the production of 3 sexes by supposing that, at the beginning, the male was produced from the sun, the female from the earth, and that sex which participated in both sexes from the moon, by reason of the androgynous nature of the moon." I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So now we have, once again, this idea of Trinity attaching sun, moon, and earth in philosophical thought here. Now, this is from the writings of Plato. This is part of the Greek philosophy of the time. You can't really take this literally. This is also pointing back to this former state of being of mankind that is said to have existed at the times of the Hyperborean, the Lemurian, and the Atlantean epochs of mankind, according to the secret doctrine. And you can see the various iterations that man has gone through, according to Plato here. Interesting, to say the least. Let's read on. Here's more of what Plato had to say. He said, "They were strong also and had aspiring thoughts. They it was who levied war against the gods, and what Homer writes concerning Ephialtes and Otis, that they sought to ascend to heaven and dethrone the gods, in reality relates to this primitive people. Jupiter and the other gods debated what was to be done in this emergency, for neither could they prevail upon themselves to destroy them, as they had the giants with thunder, so that the race should be abolished, for in that case they would be deprived of the honors of the sacrifices which they were in the custom of receiving from them, nor could they permit a continuance of their insolence and impiety. Jupiter With some difficulty, having devised a scheme, at length spoke. I think, he said, I have contrived a method by which we may, by rendering the human race more feeble, quell the insolence which they exercise without proceeding to their utter destruction. I will cut each of them in half, and so they will at once be weaker and more useful on account of their numbers. And I'm going to pause for a moment there. So once again, we have this division into the two sexes, male and female, masculine and feminine, from this androgynous third unisex of sorts talked about in the mystery schools. And you can understand a little bit of the concept that's going on today by understanding this. This is what's at the heart of this transgender push and agenda. They want to get back to this type of primordial masculine androgyny, this unified state that's taught throughout the secret doctrine. And they think if they do so, they could once again invoke a new golden age by returning to this state of being and be more godlike. Do you understand the implication here? Now, like I said, doesn't matter if any of this stuff is really true or not, and I think that I have problems with some of what's presented, but this is what they teach in their secret doctrine, and whether or not you believe it is irrelevant. What you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in this stuff, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us, and once you understand that, you understand everything. This is why they're pushing that notion. They want to get back to this state of a golden age in which man could be a threat to the gods by having this unified masculine androgynous gender present. That's what they're trying to engineer through the transgender push. Now, I know it may be a bridge too far for some people to accept, but I assure you, it lies at the heart of their secret doctrine. It lies at the heart of all the source of sexism and racism and everything else. It's all because of this secret doctrine. So let's close it up here, because Doctors deHart and Farrell say, again, we have a similar catalog of concepts as in the Mayan Popol Vuh. Number 1. There is a primordial human androgyny. Only in Plato's case, at the beginning of the cited passage, this apparently exists alongside of the other two sexes. Now, that's the only major differentiation here. And perhaps that was what they refer to in the secret doctrine as this changing over of ages, the switching between epochs. Perhaps this was what they would refer to as the remnant of the Lemurian epoch, advancing to the Atlantean epoch, and the evolution of mankind. Maybe these coexisted at the same time. I don't know. I don't claim to know. And I don't know if it's true, but this is what the stories tell us. Let's read on. So number 2, this primordial androgyny, as with the Mayans, constitutes some sort of a threat to the gods, as they were strong and had aspiring thoughts, even to the point of wanting to wage war against them and dethrone them, thus implying that this creature had some sort of knowledge by dint of its androgyny that was a threat to the gods. Or I'm going to pause there to point out that perhaps in this state, man still had his spiritual sight and could see things as they truly were, and recognize that whoever these gods were, whether they be fallen angelic beings or the like, that they didn't have good intentions for mankind, and perhaps they sought to overthrow them or get rid of them, recognizing that, and perhaps these beings had something to do with this differentiated state in human beings. I don't know. I don't have the answers. This is conjecture. So make of it what you will, but let's continue. Number 3, the gods deliberate on what to do, and, as in the Mayan account, decide that abolishing the race altogether, as they had done with the giants or the titans, was out of the question, since mankind would no longer be able to offer them sacrifice, i.e., it is implied that mankind's relationship to the gods is once again one of debt. That's an interesting thought in and of itself, isn't it, folks? Number 4. The decision is taken at the suggestion of Jupiter or Zeus that this primordial androgynous man be cut in half, i.e., that the sexes should be divided. With this decision made, the dialogue continues, seeking to explain human sexual behavior according to the Platonic doctrine of recollection of a former state of existence and its fall from the higher realm of ideals. Immediately after this division, as each desired to possess the other half of himself, these divided people threw their arms around and embraced each other, seeking to grow together, and from this resolution to do nothing without the other half, they died of hunger and weakness. When one half died and the other was left alive, that which was thus left sought the other and folded it to its bosom. Whether that half were an entire woman, for we now call it a woman, or a man, and thus they perished. But Jupiter, pitying them, thought of another contrivance, and placed the parts of generation before. Since formerly, when these parts were exposed, they produced their kind not by the assistance of each other, but like grasshoppers by engendering upon the earth. In this manner is generation now produced, by the union of male and female, so that from the embrace of a man and woman the race is propagated. From those of the same sex no such consequence ensures. Every one of us is thus the half of what may be properly termed a man, and is the imperfect portion of an entire whole, perpetually necessitated to seek the half belonging to him. Those who are a section of what was formerly one man and woman are lovers of the female sex. Those women who are a section of what in its unity contained two women are not much attracted by the male sex, but have their inclinations principally engaged by their own. Those who are a section of what is in the beginning was entirely male seek the society of males, and before they arrive at manhood, such being portions of what was masculine are delighted with the intercourse and familiarity of men. The cause of this desire is that according to our original nature, we were once entire. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So now Plato gives us this conception of things and all these various gender identities and reactions that we are seeing manipulated today. And of course, it is for this purpose in the world today, as we had said. It's about trying to re-achieve this golden age, this godlike state. You see, that's the view of those dark occultists who run things in charge. And I think we're going to go ahead and just close it up there, because they go into the Vedic terms, the Vedic view of this story here next, but we don't have time for that today because we've already run a little late. But you get the idea. We have all of these stories of antiquity that have this same alchemical theme. It has to do with this Tower of Babel moment, or the fall of man. This differentiation in mankind wherein man's plots to become God have led to this catastrophic fall of sorts. And we can see the implications of the underlying alchemical meme. Now, they're trying to engineer this towards this reunification of the gender energies, let's put it that way, into this unity of purpose of mankind. And this relates directly to the technological component of the hive mind mentality that goes along with this transhumanist notion. The creation of an internet of thoughts as a subsystem to an internet of things, wherein mankind's minds will be merged together in this hive mind type form. You see, all of this stuff relates. The gender identity bit, the hive mind mentality, it all aligns back to this. They're trying to achieve this former state which they claim exists within the secret schools, or has existed in the past, wherein man had perfect sight, perfect spiritual sight, perfect knowledge, perfect communication one with another, and was a threat to the gods, could become a god himself if he could re-achieve this state of being. And this is what they're trying to engineer through the transhumanist movement. Now, like I said, it's irrelevant if you believe this or not. There are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in this stuff, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs affect all of us. Understand it. Understand their motivation. Understand how they operate. Understand why they do the things they do, and to another degree, how they do the things they do. It's according to the manipulation of this alchemical meme in this reality, which is present, has some core of truth to it, and has been leveraged against the masses by this small group of people to engineer a new humanity. That's what they're trying to accomplish here. But I'm here to tell you, folks, natural law will not allow such a thing. God, the Creator, will not allow such a thing. It will end catastrophically in a collapse, much like the Tower of Babel. And that is why it's called a Tower of Babel moment. You see, there are many who would say history repeats itself. Time is cyclical, it's circular, it's not linear. We've been there before. There's nothing new under the sun. It's all going to implode upon itself very soon, folks. Even if they do succeed for a certain time, it's going to implode catastrophically. And we will be back to a state of being which is a little bit more pure and natural. That's the good news. And we don't have to go down this route. That's the other good news. We could put a stop to it all just by removing our consent from their systems. By telling them, no, we're not going to do these things you tell us to do or try to coerce us into doing. Plain and simple, and we could avoid that whole catastrophic Tower of Babel moment in the modern era. And we could have a better future for ourselves and for our progeny. Anyway, folks, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you, I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now. Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit. Accept no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.